Today we're going to look after the adding and subtracting fractions. Won't take us long. I'm sure all of you are fairly familiar with that. Multiplying and dividing fractions. Okay, so for those of you who have no problems with fractions, you have an awesome hour of review, okay? For the rest of you, let's just cover the essentials so that you can add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions without any issues, okay? Okay, so the first thing that we have to understand about adding and subtracting fractions is that we have something that's called a common denominator that has to be observed and used so that you can add and subtract fractions. For instance, if we had 3/8 plus 3/4, okay? So that's we need to add these two fractions. The problem with adding these together, and whether we're in construction, machining, millwrighting, doesn't matter. You cannot add or subtract fractions which their denominators or the total number of parts available aren't equal, right? So if I had 8 units here, we can go back to preschool, right? If I had 8 bananas and 4 apples, how many bananas do I have, right? I still only have 8. How many apples? I still only have 4. I can't add the two things. They're not the same. So we have to make these the same, and that's what the common denominator is. So to find a common denominator, what we need to do is we need to find a number that both the 8 and the 4 will equally divide into. Now, in this particular case, 4 and 8 can both go into 8, right? We could make them both out of 16 because 4 goes into 16 4 times, 8 goes in it twice. But we might as well find the lowest common denominator, right? So 8 goes into itself once, so we can rewrite this fraction. 8 goes into itself once, and then this doesn't change, right? So 3/8 is still 3/8, plus 4 goes into 8 twice, so we change this to an 8, right? 4 times 2 is 8. So whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. So if 4 times 2 is 8, then 3 times 2 is 6. Now we can add these fractions. The denominator, okay, must be the same to add or subtract fractions. So the only job you have, right? It doesn't matter if we have 3/16 plus 5/8 plus 3/4. Okay, I can add these all together by finding a common denominator. 16 goes into itself once, 8 goes into 16 twice, 4 goes into 16 4 times. So I can write this as 3/16 plus 2 times 8 is 16, 2 times 5 is 10, 4 goes into 16 4 times, so 4 times 4 is 16, 4 times 3 is 12. And now I can add up the 3 plus 10 plus 12, 22, 25 16ths. Okay, by adding those fractions together, or to add those fractions together, we need to find the common denominator, okay? It's a number that each of the denominators will each go into, okay? So right now that leaves us with 25/16. If you remember, that's called an improper fraction. It's improper because if there's only 16 pieces available, how can we have 25 of them, right? So that's an improper fraction. So we want to, unless we're told to leave it as an improper fraction, we want to always bring it to its mixed number, right? So this is 25 divided by 16, remember? You can also think of it as how many 16s are in 25. We know there's one. We know there's 1 16 in 25. Well, how much do you have left over? So if you can't do math quick in your head, right? 25 minus 16. You can't take 6 away from 5, so 15 minus 6 is 9. I borrowed it from there, so it's 0, right? So we know that we have 1 and 9/16. Remember, this doesn't change, right? If your denominator is 16, it stays 16, right? If it's 25/16, when you turn this into a mixed number, the denominator does not change. You just want to find out, you want to convert your improper fraction into a mixed number, and you do that by finding the number of whole, how many 16s, right, there are first, and you write that number here, and then whatever's left over is your numerator. Okay, so pretty easy. For a quick review, that's pretty easy for adding fractions, and this goes for any fraction, right? All you got to do is find the common denominator and find the lowest one. That makes the most sense. All right. Let's just go to subtracting fractions. Okay, same thing. You cannot add or subtract a fraction unless they have a common denominator. So if I had, I don't know, let's say 13/16, and I wanted to subtract 1/2, we'll just keep it simple. First thing I've got to do is find the common denominator, right? So how many, can 16 and 2 go into a common number? Sure they can. They can both go into 16, right? So 13/16, this one doesn't change. Minus, how many 2's are in 16? Right? There's 8. So 8 times 2 is 16. So 8 times 1 is 8. Now I can subtract them, right? 13 minus 8 is 5 over 16. So there's no trick here, guys. This is it, okay? To add or subtract fractions, just find the common denominator and find the lowest common denominator. That just makes your life much, much easier. Let's look at multiplying fractions. People start to get a little bit confused when it comes to multiplying fractions. Let's take 3/4 times, let's do 8/9. Okay, when it comes to multiplying fractions, we do not need to find common denominators, okay? Simply all we have to do is multiply the numerators across, okay? So 3 times 8 is 24, and then multiply your denominators. 4 times 9 is 36. Multiplying fractions, very, very easy, okay? Just multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. It is good practice, people, okay? It is good practice to always reduce your answer to lowest terms, okay? Unless the question you're given is, multiply the following fraction and round to 36ths, right? Or 32nds or 18ths or whatever. If you're not given that instruction, then reduce this to its lowest terms. So what we want to do is we want to find a number that equally goes into both of these. And so again, not all of us can just see numbers right away, right? What we want to do is we want to look at this and see if there is something simple to reduce this. So if you're not sure, you can always divide them by 2, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Don't be embarrassed. You can change this 24/36 into 12 over 18. If that's the easiest first step for you. You might say, oh, okay, I can divide this in half again, 6/9, right? Because half of 12 is 6, half of 18 is 9. Can I reduce it further? Yeah, now it's easier to see, right? I know that 3 can go into 6 and it can go into 9, right? So if I bring the 6/9 down here to look at, how many 3's in 6? There's 2. How many 3's in 9? There's 3. So 24/36 in its lowest terms is 2/3. Okay, so what it's important that if you can't right away here see that, oh yeah, that's 2/3. We can't all see that way. We don't all think that way. Okay, so this isn't about who's fastest. This is just about being right. Okay, so if you've got to reduce it in steps, reduce it in steps. If you can see it right away, reduce it right away. Okay. All right, when it comes to multiplying several, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 common fractions, because we don't always just have a set of fractions that we have to multiply by. So let's do this. Let's do 2/3 times 5/6, okay, times 3/10. Okay, so I want to explain something to you here. Remember what I said about reducing the lowest terms once we've solved a fraction? So there's a neat little trick that we can apply before we even solve the fraction, okay? And some of you may know this and some of you may not. I can reduce these numbers before I even multiply them. So I want to give you 2 examples, okay? 2 times 5 is 10, times 3 is 30, right? 3 times 6 is 18, times 10 is 180. Now what I would have to do is I would have to reduce this to its lowest terms. I'd have to find a number like we did in the last one and reduce this to its lowest terms, okay? Or I can take my 2/3 times 5/6 times 3/10, and I can reduce before I multiply. So look at a numerator in one fraction and a denominator in another fraction and see if you can reduce them. As an example, the denominator here 3 and the numerator here 3 are the same. 3 goes into itself once. 3 goes into itself once. So I've changed this fraction to 2/1 and this fraction to 1/10. Okay, so I'm not going too fast. If I want to reduce these fractions before I solve it, find a denominator in one fraction and a numerator in another fraction and see if you can reduce them. Here's another example. How many 2's are in itself? 1. How many 2's are in 6? 3, right? How many 5's in itself? 1. How many 5's in 10? 2. And now my fraction looks like this, people. 1 times 1, or sorry, 1/1 times 1/3 times 1/2, which is going to be easier to reduce, right? So 1 times 1 times 1 is always going to be 1, right? 1 times 3 is 3 times 2 is 6. Okay? So let's see, is that true? If I do this the long way, is it true? Well, the first thing I can do is I can get rid of the zeros, right? The zeros cancel each other out. Okay? So now I have 3/18. How many 3's in itself? 1. How many 3's in 18? 6. So you can save yourself some work. Like this is a simple example, but imagine if you have a run of 15 fractions, right? How you may have to reduce that at the end and figure out what that final number is. So reduce the fraction before you solve it. And you know, you can see 5 and 10, there's a relationship, right? Right? 5 goes into 10 twice, goes into itself once. So scratch out the 5 and put 1, scratch out the 10 and put 2. Right? 3 goes into itself once, scratch out 3, put 1. 3 goes into itself once, scratch out 3 and put 1. But you cannot do that in its own fraction, right? It's always opposite fractions. So it can be you saw here, it was the denominator on the fraction on the far left and on the numerator on the top right, right? Okay, so just a quick lesson in multiplying fractions. Okay, clear as mud? We're good? I don't see any hands. I don't see any head shakes. All right. Moving on. Let's not waste any time then. All right, let's go to dividing fractions, everybody's favorite. All right. Before we discuss dividing fractions, you need to understand what a reciprocal is. Okay? 3/8 is our fraction. Okay? The reciprocal of 3/8 is 8 over 3. So the reciprocal is when we flip the fraction upside down. Okay? So the denominator becomes the numerator, and the numerator becomes the denominator. So that's a reciprocal, people. Okay? So if I had this example, if I had 5/8 and I wanted to divide by 3/4, 5/8 divided by 3/4. Well, what I'm saying is 5 divided by 8 divided by 3 divided by 4. To solve this easily, what we do is we take the 5/8, rewrite it, change the sign from division to multiplication, and then write the reciprocal of 3/4. And now we solve it like multiplication. 5 times 4 is 20, and 8 times 3 is 24. And then we reduce, right? Okay, so if we reduce this, 4 goes into 25 times, 4 goes into 24 6 times. Division is simply, guys, it's knowing that you can take your division question, you can change the second fraction to its reciprocal, and as soon as you do that, it flips the sign as well. Remember that the sign essentially belongs to this fraction, right? So if I flip the fraction, then I have to flip the sign. So 5/8 divided by 3/4 becomes 5/8 times 4 over 3.